So, if you know anything about me, you know that I used to watch professional wrestling when I was a kid. I liked it all the way up until I was about 19, 20, something like that. And I think the reason why I stopped watching professional wrestling was simply because I started to be able to guess the storyline. I could guess what the end of basically every single match was going to be. And that became a little bit tedious to me because if you don't know this, sorry, spoiler alert, but professional wrestling is not a fighting thing. It's actually a soap opera, planned, choreographed stuff where these two hulking dudes in tights, think The Rock, think John Cena, Hulk Hogan, Macho Man Randy Savage, Andre the Giant. The list goes on and on. Big, huge dudes pretending to beat the crap out of each other, actually getting hurt a lot of the time. Cutting their foreheads with razor blades so that they look like they're bleeding, hitting each other with metal chairs, professional wrestling. Now, once the storylines became too obvious to me, I wasn't that interested in watching it anymore, but I always held a spot for it in my heart. Now, the thing is, recently I saw the physicist Eric Weinstein talking about Kayfabe. Now, Kayfabe is this interesting concept that may permeate all levels of our society and is a big part of professional wrestling. And I hadn't thought about kayfabe in a while, and I had been sitting here thinking about it as a result. So here are some ideas about kayfabe. Now, according to Eric Weinstein, kayfabe is a system of stratified lies that wrestling is undergirded by. Now, as great as an explanation as that is, he's a physicist, and that's very amazing language, but I don't think it quite gets to the bottom of things. Well, actually, it's a very accurate and very concise way of putting it, and he's much less verbose than I am. So let's be more verbose and expand on that, shall we? Kayfabe is a term found in the world of professional wrestling. Again, think The Rock, think John Cena, blah, blah, blah. Its origins are mysterious and storied, and its meaning has changed over the years. Okay, so it's not exactly the same thing as it was at the beginning. So let's talk about where it was at the beginning. So what I could dig up from researching, it was a kind of carnival language. The word kayfabe is not actually a word. It's just sort of a carny speak sort of situation. I would say consider it similar to Pig Latin. Like if you were saying the word fake in Pig Latin, you might say akefe. If you're saying the word fake in carnival slang, you might say kayfabe. And look, this is just somewhat my speculation, somewhat what I was able to glean. I can't prove that that's originally where it comes from, because this is like the 1800s they came up with this. But I believe that kayfabe is actually carny speak for the word fake. That way, in today's terms, it's a little different. Today's terms, it's different. So in today's terms, kayfabe means keeping the secret behind professional wrestling, and that secret being that it's fake and not real fighting. Okay? The matches are storylines, and kayfabe is selling the storylines and suspending the disbelief of the audience. Now it's kind of like going to a movie. You don't expect them to act like the whole thing is fake. You know, you're like, okay, look, guys, this is a movie. Tom Cruise isn't really a fighter jet pilot. He's an actor. Like, nobody has to say that. You're like, okay, look, I'm willing to suspend my disbelief here, as long as you just don't do too many things that make it obvious that you're faking this thing. Just so don't do that. So kayfabe is selling the storylines, selling this suspended disbelief to the audience. So it's not as bad as it was back in the day. So the origins of kayfabe date back to before these kinds of wrestling shows really existed. It was before they were even faked. And before people actually knew that they were faked, of course, because they weren't. They were real matches. The sport was actually called catch wrestling. So catch wrestling matches would take place in circuses and carnivals like we talked about. So there'd be like a traveling circus or a carnival that would come to town. And then there'd be these big dudes, tough dudes, wrestling each other for real. And the matches could only be won by pinning or tap out. So that means there was really no time limit. It was just like, who's going to win, this tough guy or this tough guy? And they'd legitimately wrestle each other until somebody lost. And it's no time limit. You just do this. So as you might imagine, matches like this could last for hours, which it doesn't sound bad on the face of it, but these were not matches of nonstop action. Like these could have long lulls that were wrestlers would find themselves in a stalemate. It's like, hey, how am I going to get this guy? They're holding each other forever. It would be this kind of thing. So needless to say, this isn't really too fun for the audience. And to make matters worse, the wrestlers would often get injured during these matches because it was a grueling actual battle between one another, and it could put the wrestler out of commission, and it would lose the organizers and, like, you know, the carnival heads money. This would be like, now I've paid this guy, he did a match, he's injured, I don't have a show for tomorrow, I need to get somebody else to wrestle this guy. It's a pain in the ass. You could actually think about these matches similar to like the old UFC back when there was like a 20-minute round and you had the Gracies doing jiu-jitsu. You had Hoist Gracie. Sometimes he'd hold a guy for 7 minutes. And it's not easy to hold a big guy who's trying to beat you up for 7 minutes. So that's kind of amazing in itself. But a lot of people hated jiu-jitsu. Think about that. In our day and age where everyone loves jiu-jitsu, people hated jiu-jitsu because they're like, I don't want to watch this guy hold this guy for 10 minutes. But with time limits changing, rules changing, jiu-jitsu became very interesting. People always going for a submission is quite incredible, and it's an amazing martial art. Still, back in those days, it was like that. So we had kind of this situation where things needed to change. So imagine you're running a circus. Okay, you've got this event that is both very dangerous for the participants and also boring on the other side for your audience. So you get to pay guys that get injured and eventually are out of the game, so you don't have a show and it messes up everything for you. And the audience is bored and leaves a lot of the time, doesn't really want to pay for it. What do? That's right. You guessed it. You fix the matches. You rig the matches so that there is constant action and so that no one gets hurt on purpose. And on purpose anyway, because it's still an athletic sport, or it's still athletic as an activity. You can't really call it a sport if you fix the matches. That's sort of the problem there. The audience can be captivated by other things, though. They can be captivated by long-term storylines, and they creates a repeat customer situation. Like, oh, this guy's a champion. He beats everybody, but then he was betrayed by so-and-so, and he got beaten, and now he's going to come back for revenge. You can balance the emotions of the audience by creating these storylines, and these people come back again and again and again. And so you're going to have to come up with code words, though, because this is at a carnival, it's at a circus. There's people everywhere. There's your customers that are paying are everywhere. You can't just say, hey, we need to do one of these fake matches, guys. Come over here. Right? You can't assume that other people are going to keep the secret. So you use code words that lets nearby marks, aka those repeat customers we were just talking about. The carnival people call them marks or rubes. And that's because you kind of know how carnivals are, right? Like, you think about going to a carnival, you throw a baseball at some glass bottles and watch it bounce off like it's bulletproof. Like, try to knock over those bottles. Look, it's some basic bottles. Of course, the carny guy is going to throw it. It knocks them all over. Look, it totally works. So they're like super honest. That's the thing about circuses, is what I'm trying to say. What's the thing about circuses and carnivals is that they're super, super, super honest. So when you're setting up something that's a scam, you need to have language to use so that nothing slips out. And that the catch wrestling business was no different than this. They came up with words, and that's very likely where the term kayfabe comes from. So there are some other terms. And a match that was rigged was called a worked match. So works, or a work, is meaning something that is fixed, that is figured out, that is scripted, that kind of idea. That's the essential idea. So a worked match is a fixed match. It's like, okay, we've worked it a little. We tweaked it. We did a little tweaks. Instead of it being real, it's not real. It's kayfabe. It's AKA fake. So the term worked meant that they planned the ending in advance. Some of the things that would happen during the match were improvised. The wrestlers would do their own thing. Much like today, the wrestlers still improvise a lot of their own matches and the moves and things that happen in a match. But the ending is a foregone conclusion. Okay? On the reverse, there is a term that means shoot. So shoot meant that something was actually real. A shoot is something that's like, okay, this is not, it's like, shoot, this happened and we didn't expect it. So maybe somebody gets injured, something happened by accident, or an element of reality was added into the match that blurs the lines between fact and fiction, because this is a real thing, but this is supposed to be a fake match. So that's kind of an interesting thing. So there's a combination of those two terms, a worked shoot. And a worked shoot is something scripted that includes something real, right? This is when things get dicey. This is when things start getting interesting and start relating to other things in our culture and our world and our media and all that. A work shoot is a tactic you may recognize in a lot of these other areas of culture. We could talk about that a little bit later, but it's essentially, it's both worked and real. It's both fake and real, kind of mixed together. So a worked or scripted match has several elements to it, and the elements are really the anatomy of kayfabe as we know it today. Every scripted match has a few different things, and this is kind of how it goes. Here's some of the elements. Every scripted match has a babyface, which is a hero or a good guy. It's someone for the audience, of course, to cheer for, to get behind, someone to create pop, which is another word. Pop means an audience's positive reaction to something happening in the show, right? So every time you're cheering for somebody, the guy you want to be winning wins, and the audience goes, oh my God, the thing that just happened is crazy. I am so excited. That's pop. Now, wherever there's a baby face, of course, there must be a heel. Now, a heel in wrestling is the villain, essentially the bad guy, in simple terms. They're here to create heat. It's another term. Heat is a wrestling term for negative reactions from the audience. Okay? You get pop when it's good, you get heat when it's bad. Aren't these terms awesome? Aren't you? I mean, I find it kind of I'm interested. If I'm just talking to myself, I'm fine with it, because look, heat, pop, worked, shoot, kayfabe. Let's do this. So, although the matches are scripted, the wrestlers often improvise a large portion of the matches, right? They do their own thing. They have moves. They have an art form to wrestling that allows them to go back and forth on the fly. So that's pretty interesting. But there are portions called spots. Now that's when particular turns of the action happen and particular moves are used. A spot is a specific set of moves. Like a lot of wrestlers have a finishing move. They also have an in-between move. They have one or two moves that they use, and this could be a spot. Like, okay, this is the spot where I use my move on you, and this is the spot where you use your move on me, and then this is the spot where we finish, right? So it's a pretty interesting kind of thing. It's called a spot when specific moves are used. A high spot is when a wrestler is doing a spot that involves an acrobatic maneuver, such as jumping off the top ropes, doing flips, a moonsault. I used to love the moonsault. There was a guy named Bam Bam Bigelow way back in the day who did the best moonsault I've ever seen and ever will see, as far as I'm concerned. You can check it out if you'd like. Out of all of these terms, the most important one, there's a lot of terms. We talked about terms, but I think the most important ones are worked and shoot. The most important to kayfabe is really the working and the shoot, the unreality and the reality. And when they come together as a work shoot, since this directly relates to the truth or lack thereof in a match. This is the truth of it or the false of it, or the true and false mixed together. Like worked is fate, shoot is real, and work shoot is something real that has been integrated into the performance. This is something real that's been integrated into the performance, and I find that's where things get really, really, really interesting about kayfabe, because it's neither true nor false anymore, right? Like this is where it's like, okay, yeah, no, this is really happening, but also they plan to say this, and they plan to do this, and they're working with it anyway to get to the end of their storyline, which is not real, but there is actually some reality in this. Very, very confusing and also very interesting. So why would a scripted show need to incorporate something real into their show at all, into their fake scripted thing? Like, why would that be important? Well, of course, sometimes this happens by accident, right? There was the situation way back in Montreal. It was called the Montreal Screwjob. It was when Bret the Hitman Hart thought he was going to win, against Shawn Michaels because he didn't want to lose in front of a Canadian audience. And they were like, dude, that's not the storyline. But eventually said, sure, whatever. Then they had the referee count 1, 2, 3 real quick and have him lose. And Shawn Michaels got out of there real quick. And Bret was screwed out of the title. And everyone said, you screwed Bret. It was like a big thing. And that was not real. That was a shoot. I mean, that was not fake. That was not fake. That was a shoot. That was not a thing that they were planning to do at all. He wanted something. They wanted something. So he was actually surprised. So the outcome was no longer scripted at that point, which I thought was kind of interesting. Another one that's a lot more sad was actually Bret the Hitman Hart's brother, Owen Hart. He was playing the Blue Blazer. It was a character, kind of one of these take your vitamins, eat your cookies and say your prayers and take your vitamins, drink your milk to say your prayers type of person. And he was pretending to be a superhero, like a goofy superhero from the 50s kind of thing. And he did a stunt where he was dropping from the ceiling, except for what happened was he actually dropped from the ceiling. Something snapped, the harness didn't work, he fell out of it, something in that realm, and just dropped like 100 feet to the middle of the ring, bouncing, and it killed him. So obviously this was not planned to happen. And the announcers, the announcers were sitting there going, guys, this is not an angle. There's real danger here. We have to stop for a minute. The paramedics are here. It was really terrible. The next people who had to come out, the wrestlers that were coming out, a lot of them had tears in their eyes. They were trying to smile and continue the show. But it was obvious that something really bad happened. And that, again, that's a shoot. It's a rough example of a shoot, but that's a shoot. And it happened. And that's not something they wanted, and they had to handle it. That's a accidental shoot. You know, other times there is the work shoot. And an example was, like, there was a time where CM Punk, a couple of times actually, CM Punk having his microphone cut off became like a meme actually after a while. He came in the ring, busted John Cena through a table, and then sat down on the walkway with a microphone in his hand, talking about how his contract sucks, how it sucks how The Rock gets to just do the main event even though he hasn't even been in wrestling forever, and he was just complaining, and his microphone is cut off in the middle. Now, he was frustrated about those things. The reality of his contract stuff was real. The things he were talking about were real. But they didn't really cut his microphone off because he was saying things they didn't expect. His whole speech was approved by the WWE. This was a planned, scripted thing, but with truth in it. So that's what you would consider something like a worked shoot. And that's certainly confusing, but also very compelling for the audience, right? Like, it keeps the audience off balance, but very interested, because it's like, oh, I'm actually getting a peek behind the scenes, because you actually are, but it's the peek behind the scenes that is worked so that you can see the truth in a palatable way to the company. So if that's confusing to you, well, it's confusing to me, but it's very interesting. Very interesting. So this element of kayfabe to me is probably the most interesting, and I would say most borrowed from element of wrestling. I think wrestling has had kayfabe borrowed from it by other things. Like some examples, of course, there's a million more. There's a million more examples. It is what it is, you know? Now, a pure shoot, like the one we talked about with Owen Hart passing away right there in the middle of a pay-per-view event, that's not really generally good for the organization. Like it often involves something like an injury or an altercation, something like that. But like the CM Punk situation, the WWE has learned that there is no such thing as bad emotions. You know, when it comes to putting on a show, wrestling's not about thinking. It's about feeling. It's about feeling. It's about seeing something that seems real, seems fantastic, and you get on an emotional level instinctually, and it just quickly gets you feeling, not thinking about, hey, that's not likely that really happened. No, you're just like, oh my goodness, he jumped off a ladder into a table. This is crazy. When wrestling includes a level of reality into the promos, into the shows, it is purely planned. It gives them a kind of electricity that crowds love. It's still true, but also planned. it's electric. The crowd loves it. I love it. I don't know. Actually, these days I don't think I like it as much. That's why I haven't watched wrestling in forever and forever, because it's like, I'm just not as emotional as I was when I was young. And it is what it is. I wonder if that happens to everybody or if it just happened to me. You tell me. You tell me your situation. Besides it being interesting, why am I talking about kayfabe? I think we need to let's get down to brass tacks here. Why am I talking about kayfabe? Now, wrestling is extremely popular. It's one of the most popular shows on television. That's just period. Oftentimes was the most number one watched thing on TV, period. So it's this soap opera that's been going on for over 100 years. And audiences, they love it more and more and more all the time. Now, that may not be the end of the story. Kayfabe, I think, can be found in other areas of life and culture, like I said before, and to understand that we're experiencing it, I think we need to understand the elements of it. So let's go over that. Like, for kayfabe to exist, you need a specific series of elements, and those elements start with an organization. You need an organization, some kind of structure, some kind of setting that allows things to play out. You need a hero, you need a villain, you need an audience who agrees to go along with the story being told. An audience that agrees to go along with the story being told. That's the most integral thing in all of it. You know, when kayfabe breaks out of wrestling and gets into other arenas, you normally see it in the form of a worked shoot. It's why I mention the worked shoot so much, is because it really does show up in that way. It really does show up in that way everywhere else. It's rare that outside of a pure fiction like a movie or wrestling or some kind of show that you would find a pure kayfabe where it's just pure fiction, a pure work. It's normally a worked shoot in reality, because these are things in reality and things in culture, things in different areas. So there is some truth to the tale being told, but it's often mixed with a good dose of fiction. Some storyline that is palpable and the audience is willing to accept, right? Like, of course, we talked about films and TV. Films and TV are a type of kayfabe because the audience goes in knowing that it's fake, but reacts anyway. Now, in that sense, it's the same as wrestling. But I also think that it's a little bit different in pure fiction. I think a good example of a work shoot in film or television would be a documentary or a biopic, particularly the biopic. You know, have you ever watched a biopic and then searched for the real story online to find that the film changed most of the facts in order to present a story in a particular way? Like, have you ever done that? You go back and you're like, hey, let's see, what's the real story? You know, you watch the Freddie Mercury biopic about Queen, and it's like, well, most of the stuff in the movie didn't really happen, and didn't even happen in that order, in that way, or didn't happen at all. And it's like, oh, okay, well, great. I guess it was a fun movie, but they just took some highlights of reality and mostly made a fiction. And it's like that with almost any musical thing. It is that way. Elvis is another good example. Like, none of that is really accurate, but you know, they wanted to present Elvis in a particular way, probably wanted to sell Elvis's old stuff to a younger audience. And so they had this idea of let's make a biopic. So a lot of times Oppenheimer's another one. Did that really go that way? Everyone loves Oppenheimer, but did that really go that way? And was the story being told accurate to the reality? I don't know. You know, I think a lot of the reality was like, oh yeah, actually there was major security concerns, and Russia got nukes because of Oppenheimer's lax security, and his security status was revoked. Can you believe it? Like, yeah, I do believe it. It sounds logical, but you know, the facts are changed or presented in a particular way in a lot of biopics in order to make you feel a certain way about the main character, because he's the baby face, and you have to back the baby face. You have to feel heat towards the villain. You have to feel pop towards the baby face, and you have to willingly accept this storyline, knowing that, you know what, it said it said this is based on a true story or based on true events. And it means that something like this might have happened, but we changed it. We changed it. And I think that could be considered kayfabe, because I think we know that they changed it. It's written at the beginning saying this is based on stuff that maybe happened, kind of, sort of. It's sort of like that. It's a little like what happened, but also we just wrote it in a script and made it into a hero's journey. And that's what it is. We had a vision, and reality wasn't going to get in the way of that. I'm not bitter. Every McDojo. Do you guys know what a McDojo is? It's a martial arts school that does kind of fake martial arts, and they pretend like it's the most deadliest art in the entire universe, and they do magic. That's a McDojo. Or somebody who just like found a black belt somewhere and we're like, you know what? I'm a black belt. The universe just, it's like Arthur and the sword and the stone, or the Lady of the Lake gave Arthur the sword. Like the Lady of the Lake gave them a black belt. So you're a black belt now. You're the king of England. Can you believe this? So, okay, it's where a sensei pretends to have magical chi powers, essentially. That's kayfabe. Because no one in the school, I think in their heart, maybe even if it's just subconscious, I think in their heart they know none of this stuff works because the techniques never work for them, ever. They got beat up yesterday doing this same, qigong stuff or whatever. And it is what it is. It didn't work. It never works. The magic never works. But they kind of lie to themselves and pretend because they see their sensei doing all these amazing things and it must work. Maybe they just need to meditate under a waterfall for the next 10 years and it's going to work. It's going to work out. They're going to get the magical breakthrough of nirvana and they're going to be able to beat the crap out of 1,000 enemies with guns all at once, just using, the power of the force. And meanwhile, they spend their time falling down on purpose in class whenever the instructor does the dim mak. And that's until some actual fighter shows up at the dojo and goes like, hey man, look, I challenge you, let's fight. Beats the crap out of them in 5 seconds and goes, hey, you all right, man? It looks like your chi stuff didn't work. And most of the students are like, okay, I guess I'll stop pretending to fall down now. It's probably never going to happen. And some stick around and keep fooling themselves. But I think that's kayfabe to some degree, because at this point, we all know what's fighting and what's just an art or a dancing form that you may love to do. And it's totally fine if you like that. But it may not work without pressure testing. We know about this sort of stuff now. So a McDojo is a good example of kayfabe because the people are kind of willingly accepting that maybe this doesn't work, but I just like the martial art and I'm going to keep trying. That's the thing. I'd say let's move on though. The most obvious example would be how politicians relate to the public. Politics. This is not a political stream and I'm not very politically minded or knowledgeable. Very ignorant about a lot of things, but it does sort of feel like the way politicians relate to the public and relate to the media, they talk about real issues. Or sometimes they invent issues. Let's be honest, that can be kayfabe as well. A lot of identity politics out there. This is the problem we're facing. It's like, what about the money? No, don't worry about the money. The problem, it's always that. They talk about issues and generally villainize their political opponents. They're garbage, awful people. Meanwhile, they're all friends in the back, kind of like wrestling, using the most emotionally igniting topics possible. They pick the topics that will get you angry, get you fearful, get you sad, get you riled up, and get you galvanized against their opposing side. And when they get into office, what they don't do is change anything. Kind of just goes the same, right? Not much changes seemingly. And it's what's interesting is it seems that most people don't actually expect a politician to change the world in the way that they say they will during their campaign. They don't expect them to do what they promise to do. But they still oftentimes get very invested in the political conversation, in the argument, in saying their side is stupid and wrong. I agree. I disagree. I hate that way and I will never do this. And it's like really we get excited, I think, about these things very easily because they are emotionally inciting topics and based in some real problems. It can really get to you. It can really get to you. And yet really you get involved in the political conversation, choosing one side or another, And this, I think, has signs of kayfabe. You know, it's signs of a worked shoot. A little bit of reality, a little bit of falseness, a lot of falseness, and it's a performance, you know, something good, something bad, nothing real, and everyone along for the ride. Everyone along for the ride. Everybody's in. The audience is willing to pretend that what these people are saying is going to really change things. It's not just going to keep going in the direction of the interests that are out there, right? Like, look at the interest, look at the incentives, and then you'll see the direction things are going to go. And all of that emotional talk seems to fade away. And galvanizing a group of people against a particular side didn't seem to actually make anybody's life any better like it promised. But we all pretended like it would, probably without really believing that it would. Because it's never happened in all of history that any politicians really did anything. I don't know. Am I wrong? That's probably wrong. That's a fact. Hey, look, this is YouTube. I'm a YouTuber. This is kayfabe. Like, I'm just telling you right now, this has got to be kayfabe. I am inciting your anger by telling you that all of the stuff you cared about in politics didn't matter. Cheap heat. Another example that's somewhat offshoot of the political arena is large news organizations. What did I say that for? What am I saying? Large news organizations. They're similar as they tell stories that cause an immediate emotional reaction. They give very little actual information, just enough of the information that pisses you off or makes you fearful. It's an example of cheap heat. It's like instantly we've got their attention. Hey, did you know everybody hates you and is trying to kill you? What? What do you mean? They're trying to kill me? That's pretty much every single news story you've ever seen. Or it's just like a cute squirrel riding on water skis. That happens too. If the news story immediately makes you angry, immediately makes you fearful or sad, something in that realm, or a little bit of combination of all those things, before you've had time to even think, you feel that way, boom. Like, you haven't had a chance to think about the issue that's being presented. If that happens, it might be the same tactics used in professional wrestling. It might be kayfabe. You never know. Influencers on the internet. There's another one, right? Influencers on the internet like me. And I see this all the time. I never, ever want to put a title that's too crazy. And then I'm just like, why don't you just do the craziest titles possible? Everybody loves it. If you have something that has to do with nudity or violence or serial killing or something, write that in the title. Write violent nudist serial killer murders the beat, you know? And it's like, then people will click on it. And it's so hard not to do that, right? Influencers use this tactic because it's clickbait titles, you know? And this is an old tactic. I've read zillions of 1950s comics, and I have read the ads that are in 1950s comics. I've also seen the old advertisements. They all use clickbait. Like, do you want to stop being a scrawny little wimp? Do you want to be not a baby micropenis wimp? Well, then you better buy this book that's going to teach you how to do squats. And then you're going to be able to have all the women. And it's like every single thing. They sold vibrators in those comic books, being like, oh, it's going to reduce the stomach fat. And the picture is like a woman laying down with the vibrator real close to anyway. Everyone knows these titles aren't real. Everyone knows this clickbait stuff is not real. It's not going to represent the actual video. It might have something to do with the video, but it's not as extreme as all that. But the videos with the clickbait titles get the clicks. They get the clicks. So the audience knows it's clickbait. The audience knows. It's been 25 years. Never mind. It's been since the 1950s. Okay? It's been 70 years of clickbait. And everyone still clicks on it. They get the most views. That's how it works. So the reason I wanted to go into this topic in the first place, I know I've been rambling. I've been going off on a tangent. But the reason I want to talk about kayfabe was because, well, one, it's interesting, and two, because I felt like I was getting far too used to being lied to from basically every single direction. I'm getting used to it. Like, it's common at this point. I don't expect the clickbait title to be real. Just like I said, I don't expect that. I don't expect the influencer to have any answers for me or any special secret to life that I can use to hack reality. I don't think their reality hacks, life hacks, are going to really do anything. You know what I mean? I probably won't cut the watermelon any better than I normally cut the watermelon. I don't expect the news to be true or informative at all. I expect it to be kayfabe. I expect it to be a worked shoot that gets you excited and angry. I don't expect any company to come through on any of the benefits that their purported benefits of their product. I don't expect any of it to work. Even sometimes they do work and it is good. I don't expect it. Right at the beginning, I don't believe it. Don't believe it. Whatever you said, whatever your marketing is, I don't believe you. Right away. I don't expect any biopic to be real. I don't expect to teach me anything about the true subject's life. Any truths about the subject's life. It's just going to be some hero's journey that paints them in a good light and shows that they went through some troubles and they got over them and they're amazing and aren't they wonderful genius? Maybe, maybe they were a terrible person. Maybe they're an actual terrible person. And because they're famous, you made a movie about them. Nothing worse than a true crime, really, where you make a movie with Zac Efron about a serial murderer. Like, that's not okay. He murdered people for real. Sorry, I don't mean to be angry. I know everyone loves true crime because it's real, but it's also kind of fake. I don't know. Maybe true crime is the only thing that's somewhat real because it's just people out there trying to get the story straight. Let's hope the story was straight. I don't know. I guess I don't really watch true crime and I shouldn't really talk about it, but I do feel that it is a little disrespectful to people who got slaughtered to be like, and then they got slaughtered and I'm putting on my makeup while I tell you about how they got slaughtered. I don't know. Is that okay? I don't expect that to be real. I don't expect any biopic to be real. I don't expect wrestling to be real. I don't expect any story to be real. I don't expect any marketing of any kind anywhere to be real. And the reason I want to talk about kayfabe is because I thought that could be an issue. That could be an issue to be so used to being lied to and so used to being just accepting the fact that everyone's lying. You're out and out directly lying, getting away with it, and usually getting rich, getting famous, doing better than everyone else because you're fine with lying and putting this fake story forward. Now look, I've written comic books, I've written books, I've done some things. I like movies. I'm a private person. I don't want to tell everybody everything. So I understand that people might not say everything being 100% accurate, 100% true all the time. And I'm not saying you can't have an on-stage persona or something. I feel like it would be hard not to because you're performing. But there's a difference between performance and directly lying to get people's attention. And I think it's kind of gross. Or sensationalizing something that isn't really a big deal. Working a shoot, adding some truth into the lie and spinning the truth in a way that's very sensational. I've never liked that. It's never been something that's okay. And yet here we are going, hey, yeah, everybody's lying. Don't worry about it. I accept it. Is it okay for every politician to be directly lying to you? Is it okay for every news source to be directly spinning stories and, presenting stuff in a way that's dishonest and disingenuous? Is that all right? To be perfectly honest, so I wanted to talk about kayfabe because I was like, yeah, no, these are direct wrestling tactics. Should politics and corporations and news outlets be professional wrestling based? Is that the way that should go? I don't know. Makes me think of the time Edward Snowden presented real evidence that everyone in their government was spying. He presented the evidence that, hey, everybody, look, everyone in your government is illegally spying on you, reading all your email, doing whatever they want. And his life was over for breaking this. He had to move to Russia. He broke the silence. He was like, I got to get the truth out. It's so important. What a great dude. And what do people say about that? Really? It's like, oh yeah, we know they do that. It's like, sure. Oh, damn you government. Ooh, thanks Obama. And then move on. They went on with their lives just as they did before, right? You just go on with your life because you expect it. Did you not think the government was doing that? Like, why wouldn't they be reading everything you've got? You think your Gmail is, how is your Gmail, how did your Gmail figure out that the next thing you wanted to say was, oh, it's just AI. It's just AI. Yeah. It's called, the program read everything in your email. Like, of course they did. Of course they did. You're not surprised. He didn't need to do that. He didn't need to tell everybody because we were all pretending it wasn't happening, knowing that it was happening, and it's fine. It's fine. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? Now they're going to know that you're cheating on your wife and your wife's cheating on you, and you both should have probably had a conversation about swinging in the first place. It's fine. You know what I mean? And the truth's a funny thing that way. If there is such a thing as the truth, because I don't know if there's one 100% global truth, but it's a funny thing once you know what's generally true for you. You either have to do something about it, which is usually hard. Let's be honest, it's hard. Or you can ignore it. And you can pretend the storyline you were following that was a lot more fun is true. It was a lot more entertaining. It was a lot cooler. We were having a good time spinning our wheels with the fake story. We were getting a lot more traction than this truth stuff. Forget that. That sucks. Bleh, boo. Don't like the truth. Now, look, it's easy to blame these large corporations. It's easy to blame large organizations, political institutions, news outlets. It's easy to blame them. It's easy to go oh, these big companies, they're conspiracying against me. They're using kayfabe techniques to manipulate people. Oh, disgusting. Terrible. Disgusting. I don't know that that's the case. I really don't know. However, look, the most important aspect, if you remember at the beginning, the most important aspect of kayfabe is a willing audience. It's a willing audience. If the audience doesn't buy the storyline, the show is over. If the audience doesn't buy the storyline, the show is over. If you don't participate, there's nothing happens. Nothing can happen. And I think that's important to remember because I know I participate in this all the time. Participating in fantasy? Are you kidding me? Why would I like movie making? Why would I like comic books about fake heroes with fake powers and weird things that happen in strange universes that never are going to be? I love the fake stuff. I totally get it. So I buy in. I'm willing to buy in. But maybe it's not always the best idea, because if the audience doesn't buy into some of these situations, the show can actually stop and maybe things can actually shift. Thing is this, the storylines, it's familiar. It's comfortable. I mean, it's an action-packed thrill ride, and most importantly, it's fake. It's fake. Look, thanks for joining me. I hope you're entertained by this. I don't have a lot more to say about kayfabe, but those are my thoughts on kayfabe. Here, they're just some ideas. This is my opinion. And my opinion now. The one thing I think that's also important is that storyline needs to move forward. I could change my opinion. I'm happy to change my opinion about this sort of stuff. And I certainly don't want to blame one thing or the other. The organization is using tactics that work because the audience is willing to allow them to work. The audience wants it. So who am I to say that that's wrong or right? I'm not. I don't think it's wrong or it's right. Sometimes it causes things to be interesting. Let's put it that way. So again, those are just some ideas, and I hope that you had fun listening to this, that it was entertaining, and that you enjoyed yourself. So look, we'll be back to our regular scheduled programming. We'll have somebody that I talk to, or I'm going to try some different stuff. I will consistently, this is something I can promise you, is I will consistently try some different things on this show. Thank you for coming to the Ragged World and listening to what I had to say. I am certainly not an intellectual or a scholar, so I would understand if you felt that what I said was dumb or something like that, because it probably is. But if you didn't know much about kayfabe, look into it. It's pretty interesting. But it might make you a little conspiratorial minded and a little bit paranoid. So all warnings given now that it's at the very end of the podcast. You've been warned at the end of the podcast not to listen to this podcast. You're welcome. Thanks again.